The Israeli government has approved the first new settlement homes in the Palestinian city of Hebron since the year 2002. The move comes on the heels of Israel's withdrawal last week from UNESCO, the United Nations' agency that promotes education, science and culture.
The UN is mandated to preserve world heritage, but UNESCO, a world body, time and again, makes a mockery of that heritage, most absurdly, when it denies the connection, 3,000 years old, of the Jewish people to our eternal capital, Jerusalem. The UN is mandated to pursue peace, but it allows Palestinian hate speech to flourish in its institutions.
Some have speculated that Israel's decision to build the new settlements is an attempt to undermine Palestine's admission to UNESCO in 2011, and then the decision in July of this year by the World Heritage Body to recognise the city of Hebron as a Palestinian World Heritage Site. Earlier on, I spoke to Due-Gundersen, a specialist on international relations in the Middle East, and asked him if he agrees.
Well, that can certainly be seen as part of it, but I think we have to remember that this is not the first time settlements have been announced. What I find from my own research is quite often the Israeli cabinet and Netanyahu himself, it's a balancing act between appeasing the Israeli, settlers and also an Israeli domestic audience versus dealing with what they would call the Palestinian issue, to put it bluntly. So certainly any time there is recognition of Palestinian culture, pro-Israeli settlers will move in very quickly to try to undo that, including through rhetoric. What I find interesting especially is the fact that when settlements are announced, it does not mean that they're going to be as big as people think they will be. But the point here is the rhetoric behind it, to basically say that Israel belongs to Israelis. And, for example, in 2013, when there was a release of Palestinian prisoners and there were negotiations, higher-ups in Israel's government basically said, look, the release of prisoners is fine, but we are going to expand settlements because Israel is for Israelis. So we must settle. And so this is something to be remembered. The rhetoric here is very, very important in the Middle East because your rhetoric as a government leader is how you deal with your people. And for Israel, there's a lot of pressure being the kind of state that it is in the Middle East, and for Netanyahu especially.
The new settlement project will include 31 homes and will be the first to be built in Hebron in 15 years. Hebron is the largest Palestinian city in the West Bank and is home to a population of approximately 1,000 Israeli settlers whose presence is recognised under international law, including the Geneva Conventions, as illegal. Peace Now, an Israeli activist organisation which campaigns for an end to Israel's occupation and colonisation of the West Bank, said in a statement that the new settlement permits would increase the number of settlers in Hebron by 20%. The housing units will be built on Shuhada Street, a main road which leads to the Ibrahimi Mosque and a market in the city's old quarter. In the year 1994, Israel closed Shuhada Street after the Ibrahimi Mosque massacre, in which 29 Palestinians were killed by an Israeli settler, and subsequently Israel imposed restrictions dividing the site.
Everybody who went to Hebron knows that the situation there is similar to apartheid.
For a long time, it has been argued that Israel's policies in Hebron and elsewhere in the West Bank are tantamount to colonization. I asked Mr. Due-Gundersen if such terminology is accurate.
Well, I think that it's that kind of term is understandable because we have to remember that Israel tries to expand its state so that Palestinian culture is effectively minimized. This varies from government to government and also from cabinet member to cabinet member. But the ultimate stance of Israel is, again, that the state of Israel has a right to exist even if it is against Palestine. So what we sometimes see is we see what I would call a cultural cleansing, so that, Palestinians, they are partially acknowledged, but they are treated as second-class citizens, many would argue. And if you were to visit the West Bank, there are some people who would say that it does feel like a refugee camp, that it does feel like colonization. So there's some very strong rhetoric from various experts who have gone into Israel and visited the West Bank that would pretty much sum up or agree with your quote there.
In the year 2002, around 10 settler housing units were built in the Tel Rumeida neighbourhood of Hebron, in which military outposts were also built in order to provide security to the settlers also residing in the city. As it stands, the Israeli settlers and the approximately 30,000 Palestinians who live in Hebron with them fall under Israeli military law. Palestinian municipal authorities have said that, following Israel's announcement that it will grant the new settlement permits, they intend to go to the Israeli Supreme Court to oppose the plan. Whether or not such a move will yield the desired outcome is uncertain, but if not, then Hebron may, once again, become the flashpoint of conflict between Israelis and Palestinians. Matthew Aiton, Radio Sputnik.